Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening. We will begin. We're going to begin with a silent word of prayer. If you would kneel with me. Amen. So it's my last presentation with you all. And I don't want to frighten anyone by saying how much we have to get through. I'll try not to make this painful. So we aren't going to review. Where we finished last was in 1850 with the 1850 Compromise. The 1850 Compromise here is linked directly to 1844. Which is linked directly to 1840. In 1840, the Whig Party compromises. The president dies, vice president becomes president. He's a slavery sympathizing expansionist. He brings that idea of annexing Texas to the forefront. The Democrat Party ran with that in 1844. They win and annex Texas, Oregon, California. In 1850, what they're struggling with is what to do with slavery in these new territories. And that disagreement in 1850 becomes dangerous. The Whig Party won the last election. With Zachary Taylor and Millard Fillmore. The Missouri Compromise was all about new territory and what to do with slavery in those territories. The issue in 1850 was quite similar. I'm quoting here from Digital History. I believe some people might have looked up that link yesterday. For time, I'm going to paraphrase. Henry Clay is old and sick. Especially elderly for their time period when you didn't live as long. He's rushing to visit a friend. This friend is Daniel Webster, the brother of the man who wrote the Webster's Dictionary. They were close allies. Clay is terrified of what is about to happen to the Union. So he visits Webster and introduces him to a compromise that he has developed. Then he brings that proposal that they've both agreed upon to the Senate. And he asks them to put away what divides them in the place of national patriotism. So put away slavery and those things that divide you, and in the name of national patriotism, accept to compromise. This is not that well received. John C. Calhoun threatens Southern secession. Clay has the full support of Daniel Webster. But there are some in the North who are anti-slavery and reject a compromise on slavery. I want us to remember this name. We should be familiar by now with John C. Calhoun. I want us to consider William H. Seward. William H. Seward of New York. He called Webster and with him Clay and their compromise but specifically Daniel Webster for defending that compromise. A traitor to the cause of freedom. The Southerners feel comfort that they see the North will compromise. But there are some in the North who see that compromise and hate it. The president, Zachary Taylor, he says we need to admit all of this new territory and then consider slavery afterwards. This would have given a massive benefit to the North. A 10-vote majority in the Senate. They could have overruled any Southern claims. William H. Seward gives a speech in the Senate. He denounces that compromise. He says there's a higher law than the Constitution, a law that demanded an end to slavery. William H. Seward was one of the foremost critics of the Compromise of 1850. He was severely criticized for that speech. During his speech, Daniel Webster decided that he needed to take care of other duties. Clay was restless. And within 20 minutes, the previously packed galleries had almost entirely emptied. And he was attacked as being a reckless enemy of the Constitution. Subverting that great document to some type of nebulous higher law. But those northern anti-slavery Whigs did defend him. But because the president won't endorse it, it appeared to be dead, the compromise. Disappointed and exhausted, Henry Clay left Washington. Then, with unexpected suddenness, the outlook abruptly changed. July 1850, President Taylor died. And Fillmore was an ardent supporter of compromise. And he passed it. New Mexico and Utah could decide slavery for themselves. California was allowed to be a free state. The slave trade was abolished in the District of Columbia. In a separate issue, Texas was paid off. And what caused abolitionists the most heartache was that fugitive slave clause. To please the South. Many in the North believed that this issue had been resolved peacefully. One Northerner wrote, "There is rejoicing over the land." But one Southern editor wrote, "It is the calm of preparation and not peace." 2 years later, Henry Clay dies. That Kentucky politician whom Lincoln called his beautiful idea of a statesman. And Abraham Lincoln gave his eulogy. He says there are many people who don't like what Henry Clay did. But there is little or no disagreement amongst intelligent and patriotic Americans. In support of the Missouri question, that's this one. Nullification, that was the 1832 Tariff Compromise. And the now recent compromise measures. In 1852, what are the recent compromise measures? So Abraham Lincoln lists these three and says every patriotic, intelligent American would support them. He then speaks favorably about Clay's position on slavery. Because Lincoln and Clay's positions were quite identical. And he says, first of all, he notes that Clay was a slave owner for part of his life. He wanted the end of slavery. But like every wise man, he saw that to eradicate it would produce a greater evil. Even to the cause of human liberty itself. Because their fear was that if they freed those slaves would rise up and take away liberty from the white people. So Clay opposed both extremes of opinion. We've already seen that one of those extremes was abolition. An extreme position for that time, even in the North. I'll remind us what Ellen White says in Testimonies 1-264.2. That fugitive slave law was calculated to crush out of man every noble, generous feeling of sympathy. It was in direct opposition to the teaching of Christ. A higher law, like William H. Seward said. God's scourge is now upon the North because they have so long submitted to the advances of the slave power. They've sanctioned the extension of slavery. It extended every time they compromised and allowed for another slave state. And they did that in the name of upholding the Constitution and the liberty and freedom of the states. After 1850, the South has more and more victories. In the Supreme Court and in Congress. The Missouri Compromise, which limits slavery, is abolished. There is the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And there is also the Dred Scott decision of the Supreme Court. All of which favor the South. We won't go into them for time. In the North, the states are largely refusing to abide by the 1850 slave clause. Violating the Constitution and the law. So we come to the 1860 election. Society is polarized. Tension is high. But the Democrat Party is divided, which splits their vote. So now the Whig Party collapsed in the 1850s. Because of people like Seward who were so opposed to these compromises. The party collapses and now you have the rise of the Republican Party. Now in 1860, they have to pick a presidential candidate. I'm reading from a book by the Charles River editors. Called The Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850. As they came together to decide their candidate, William H. Seward was the front runner. This same Seward who fought against the 1850 Compromise. Now, what are they afraid of? We need to win this election. If we have a radical, they would lose votes in the Midwest. So while Seward is the front runner at the beginning, so many people are afraid on his radical view of abolition. He falls down the list of favorites until they choose Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was a compromise. You only have to go back and see how the two men stood in 1850. A little history of William H. Seward. He risked his entire political career on the conviction that all men should be free. He made sure that fugitive slaves were guaranteed a trial by jury. In 1846, he defended a free black man who'd murdered 4 members of a white family. Because he believed that this black man was insane and he would not get a fair trial by a white judge. During that trial, he gives some quite profound statements. Profound for them. He's talking to the jury. And asks them whether or not they've lifted their souls above the bondage of prejudice. The color of the prisoner's skin and the form of his features. Are not impressed upon the spiritual, immortal mind which works beneath them. He is your brother and mine. In form and color accepted by his father and your father and my father. And bears equality with us, the proudest inheritance that we have. The image of our Maker. Hold him to be a man. His court case was unsuccessful. His house was a stop along the Underground Railroad. In 1855, he wrote to a friend, "The Underground Railroad works wonderfully. 2 passengers came here last night." It was he and his son that carried the Emancipation Proclamation to the White House to be signed. He was the one that should have been their president. but they want the votes of the people. So Abraham Lincoln was the compromise. The same year, 1858, that Seward gave a speech against slavery, Abraham Lincoln was doing his famous debate against Douglas. To win a seat on the Senate. We read these quotes in Portugal. He says someone asked him whether or not he believed in perfect equality between the black people and the white people. Lincoln says, "I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing in any way the social and political equality of the races." I am not and never have been in favor of giving them the ability to vote or sit on a jury. Nor to hold political office. Nor to intermarry. Because of their physical differences, I believe that we will ever forbid them to live together on terms of social and political equality. And insomuch that we do live together, there must be superior and inferior. And as much as any man, I'm in favor of the white race being superior. I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery. In the states where it exists. I have no lawful right to do so and no inclination to do so. He says quite a lot. And yet still the South considered him too radical. Because like in 1844, he spoke two different things to two different groups of people. He was a compromiser himself and a compromised candidate. So when he is elected, the South secedes from the Union. So that's the 1860 election. The Republicans won it, but they compromised. By the way, I think we're all familiar with Andrew Johnson and Reconstruction. In 1865, Abraham Lincoln has been re-elected. They've won the Civil War. They were going to win it from 1863, it was clear. But they don't want the South to feel too bad, so they're going to pick a Southerner vice president. Who supports slavery. They haven't learnt from 1840 when their president died. Or 1848 when their president died. And when Lincoln dies in 1865, who's president? And who gets to reconstruct the United States? Even when they're winning the war, they still feel the need to compromise. Because how much do they really believe in equality? So the Civil War is fought in 1861. Trump supporters would say that Civil War was about maybe state rights. It was all about slavery. For the South. Why was Lincoln fighting that war? A gentleman wrote to him in mid-1862. The influential editor of the New York Tribune. It was an open letter that he published to Lincoln. And he told Lincoln, you're compromising. Congress had already passed provisions to allow emancipation. So you have the North and the South. But there are border states that are part of the Union, the North. That have sided with the North, but are themselves slave states. So in 1862, Lincoln is still compromising. To make sure that these slave border states stay with the North. And this is what he's being accused of. Lincoln responds to this open letter. And he says, I've never intended to leave anyone in doubt about the course I am pursuing. I'm fighting this war to save the Union. and I will do that the shortest way possible under the Constitution. My first object is to save the Union and not either save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing a single slave, I will do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the black race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union. And what I don't do because I do not believe it would help to save the Union. So is it entirely accurate to say that the Civil War was fought over slavery? Not by Lincoln. For time, I'm just going to paraphrase a few Ellen White quotes. I'm not going to give all of the links. But if you look in Testimonies Volume 1, (363), the 250s, she speaks a lot about slavery. She's in this early history in the early 1860s. She says many were blinded and grossly deceived in the last election. And they placed in authority men who would wink at evil. Men who would witness a flood of woe and misery unmoved. Whose principles are corrupt, who are Southern sympathizers, and would preserve slavery as it is. She never names people. But when you think that these are being written at the same time period as Abraham Lincoln's comments, however much she's impeded by sexism, she knows all about Seward. All that Lincoln said in his 1858 debates. And we should read these quotes understanding that context. Many were blinded and grossly deceived when they placed Lincoln. I'm reading from 254.1. Thousands have been induced to enlist with the understanding that this war was to exterminate slavery. But now that they're stuck in the war, they're seeing they were deceived. That the object of the North was not to abolish slavery. Lincoln had said that, and she's describing that as a deception upon thousands who joined the Northern Army. They left their homes and sacrificed their lives to exterminate slavery. And at that point in time, they see no good results from the war except to preserve the Union. And they are dissatisfied. Does she care about the preservation of the Union? That war should have been fought to exterminate slavery, and it was not. It was fought to hold together the country. She says it looks to her like an impossibility for slavery to be done away. All that abuse and cruelty exercised towards the slave is chargeable to all who have upheld the slave system, whether they are Southern or Northern. Her position is opposed to that of Lincoln vehemently. And she says God alone can wrench the slave from the hand of his oppressor. I know we're moving quite fast. I'm not trying to make direct applications of people to people today. But if we can get a sense of the compromise that had occurred from 1798 through the Civil War, so when Ellen White says God is judging the North, we understand why. It's because of the men like Clay and Webster and Lincoln. When there are protests in America right now, and they're tearing down statues, these aren't the statues heavily targeted. Because these are the good men. These were on the side you would cheer for and vote for. We haven't discussed the Democrat Party much at all. The John C. Calhouns, the Sin of the South. That should be clear to everyone. What I've wanted us to get is a feel for the compromise of the North. the history of the Civil War. It's their time of trouble. She says only God can free the slaves. How is he going to do that? In the middle of the first year of war, she says that she sees a battle scene. It's shown to her. She sees the Southern and Northern armies charge. The Northern army starts to win. There's desperate fighting. But just as that northern side seems to be winning, she sees angels come down and start to help the south. They extend the length of that battle by giving help to the south. God was deliberately extending the Civil War. He wasn't going to let the South win, but he wasn't going to let the North win too quickly. Why would that be? This was mid-1861. A whole year later, in August 62, Lincoln is saying that if he can win that war and still permit slavery, he will do it. So if God wants the end of slavery, what does he have to do? Make that war hurt. Late 1862, Lincoln has drafted the Emancipation Proclamation. From 61 to mid-63, neither side was winning. The North couldn't get the upper hand over the South. Lincoln is saying, if I can bring the Union together and still permit slavery, I'll do it. So God essentially says, I'm not going to let you bring the Union together until you get rid of slavery. He's a Pharaoh at war with God. And he's going to hurt until he does what he's told. January 1863, he passes the Emancipation Proclamation. Mid-1863, at the Battle of Gettysburg, the North begins to win. And yet, even then, the Emancipation Proclamation was a compromise. He freed all the slaves in the South, but none of the slaves in the border states. So about 500,000 slaves were still kept in bondage till the end of the Civil War. So why are we looking at this history? We're looking at it because it has direct prophetic application to today. We're tracing the history of the good men. We began to do that in Portugal in April. We're not looking at the Bannons, the Donald Trumps, the Mitch McConnells, the Jeff Sessions. We're looking at nice centrist Democrats. There's 3 specific compromises that the Whig Party made. We haven't listed 1865 because it's outside of our reform line, 1864. But where they particularly compromised was at every election. And the compromise sounds reasonable. If you want to end slavery, shouldn't you do it in a way that upholds the Constitution and the rule of law? As it's written? Shouldn't you do that in a way that holds the United States together? Shouldn't you do that with a candidate who you know will get enough votes? The issue of slavery back then was complex. It had major implications for the financial system, for the medical system, for schools. It required complex answers. It wasn't simple. So you wanted a nice centrist who'd win enough votes to become president. Make some small token changes. But nothing revolutionary that would risk splitting the country. So we come to the 2020 election. The Democrats have a very diverse pool to choose from. And what is the major reasonable debate. Do you really think Elizabeth Warren can defeat Donald Trump? We just won't win. Or a young man in a homosexual relationship. Or a black woman. So they're going to compromise. They're going to create a cult of personality around Biden that paints him as some type of benevolent uncle. He's always fought for equality, but can compromise and hold together the United States. As it becomes more and more polarized. I do not believe that Biden is Henry Clay. Clay is a symbol of a whole group of people. Of a centrist wing of a political party. That to uphold law, because it's really embarrassing to get called a dictator. Because compromise sounds nice. Because you want to win the election, you'll go with the white male candidate. Create a cult of personality around him. And ignore his past history. With busing. Putting people on buses. Look it up. It'll make sense. Look up what he did in the criminal justice reform sector. The war on drugs. Anita Hill. How he's admired for his ability to compromise with Republicans and make friends. What we're becoming confused in as a movement is where we position ourselves in regard to these external events. Last year, it was easy for everyone. Except those who left. So I guess it wasn't so easy. The message was clear. On this side, from 16 to 19, from the increase of knowledge to the test, We're meant to see Donald Trump. See him for all that he is, all that he stands for. It's not one man. He's a symbol. The overthrow of the government began at 9/11. The Republicans began to win in 2014. He's a symbol of something much bigger than himself. So for all of those socially conservative people, they felt they were being pushed left. And that was enough to bring the left. But we're making some points in how we prophetically view Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Michael Moore. Which certainly wasn't centrist. But now that we're over here, from the test to the increase of knowledge, Concord, many people are confused. And I can understand why. It's not that they're doing bad things or they're bad people. But we're in a new testing time, a new dispensation. And as I have addressed false liberalism inside the movement, many people start to say, okay, that makes sense. We are centrists. Because what I have said about false freedom, I want to challenge that understanding today. That we are not centrists. There are two misunderstandings in this movement. One is the idea that we are centrist, that is a good thing. We shouldn't be extreme. The second is the idea that we are centrist. And those supporting false freedom are saying they are the IOCs. The Michael Moores, the protesters, the defenders of freedom. Neither misunderstanding is correct. Politically, externally, we should be seeing the correct arguments of the protesters. one of the key ideas behind the protests, one of the main things that they want, is to destroy this false cult of personality around these so-called good people. Revered by statues through the United States. We have not been controlled or guided by watching them. We have not learned from their protests. We were doing that, beginning that work a month before the death of George Floyd. April 18 in Portugal. And this study would have come to the point that it is without them. Equality is a complex argument. It requires major restructuring. In education, in healthcare, in law enforcement. Positions held to by Warren, by Sanders, by those considered extremists. Someone asked Biden if he would defund the police. Because does a local police force really need a tank? When asked if he would defund the police, he said, absolutely not. Because he's not an extremist, he's a centrist that can win the election. It's all part of dealing with the inequality and racism from the beginning of America. The message has guided us to see what is right, what is wrong. The news sources are important and helpful. But the lines themselves place us. And it's not as a centrist, but who would be considered political extremists. Even in liberal America. Even in the Democrat Party. So it wasn't my point in these studies to make an application of who will win the election. I do not know who will win the election. I don't believe that we have been prophetically shown that. But regardless of that, we have to know where we stand. And many people are asking questions about voting. And I'm not saying now whether or not people should vote. But I fear that one of the reasons people so desperately want to is because they feel hope in Biden that they should not feel. A Calhoun presidency would have been horrific. As would a Trump second term. But just like World War III, we should expect this crisis, the Sunday law issues, to be more subtle. We should have seen that develop when we said those horns aren't broken. Because America never stops pretending. And we can see that in their history. The last dispensation, in the latter rain and the testing issues associated with it, we had to see Trump externally. And then internally, FFA versus the midnight cry of radical equality. From 2019, I and others have felt no desire to read more books about how bad Trump is. To share a multitude of articles about how bad he is. Of the wickedness of the Republican Party. There has been no impulse to do that. You may have noticed the media broadcast sharing less and less of him. Because we should all already know it. It's not that we've changed or that we shouldn't still follow what is occurring. But the test in this dispensation is more subtle. It's not the fight between good and evil that we simply saw in the last dispensation. It's the fight between evil and so-called compromised good. What we have in this dispensation is Biden. I'm going to erase their names. Just make it Republican. what we're meant to see is Democrat compromise. Why did they compromise? The idea is if we don't compromise, we won't win over the people. What's the internal of that? Because we have faced a shaking and rebellion in both dispensations. And the argument of the internal is the following. If we are these extremists, how will we ever win over Levites and Nethinims? How will we be successful as a movement? We have to compromise. Compromise on our vows. Compromise on our reforms, which is all compromise on equality. That argument appears differently in different countries. In portions of Africa, it has presented itself in the following way. If we really believe in freedom, we will not force equality on the people. We will seek cultural beauty in the dowry system. We will give freedom to practice equality to whatever extent, in whatever way they choose. Because God doesn't force. And God doesn't kill. I'd encourage them to go back and read the history of the Civil War. God took Abraham Lincoln by the throat. And said, "You will abolish slavery." And he was willing to allow death in that process. As they've made their argument for freedom, the idea is, how will you ever have success in South Sudan or in many of those countries if you have a message against Ebola? Teach equality, but don't practice it. You won't get the votes of the people. Same thing. The movement doesn't have the right to remove teachers or leaders. An attack on organization. Go back to 1T in the 350s. when she's referring to a brother and she names him. Who had pro-slavery sympathizers. Came under church discipline. These arguments by people who claim to be for freedom who claim to be holding up equality are presenting to their people a compromised version. And in that process, they are destroying them. And we watch the dead and the dying spiritually on every side. If people could see the carnage, they would not have any problem with me naming those leaders. But we either don't believe the sin of the North or we can't see it. In the Western world, compromise exhibits differently. Problem in this history, the problem in this history is that FFA has a feeling of what is right and wrong. And the message goes against what they feel is right or wrong. The same has occurred now. Many people have a feeling that there's nothing wrong with jewelry. With makeup. That those reform vows impinge their freedom. This is something that the external world has known for many years. In history, the Chinese used to bind the feet of their women. Mothers would do that to their daughters because it's seen to make them more desirable. In parts of Africa, they'll take a rusty knife and cut up a woman between her legs. It makes her more desirable. In South Korea, they cover themselves in toxic chemicals to bleach their skin. Because it makes them more desirable. In other parts of Africa, the women wear rings around their necks to make it appear longer. Up to 25 pounds. Or they practice scarification. They create deep cuts across the bodies that scar. Because it's considered desirable. And for 6,000 years, women have been taught that your value depends on how desirable you are. And this push for jewelry and everything associated with that kind of lifestyle, it's not that those women are somehow immoral and evil. It's that they're damaged by 6,000 years of sexism. And as a movement, we will not compromise and say that that is okay. Our position on jewelry does not make us centrist. The people that cannot see the inequality in those practices are suffering the same thing FFA did. It goes against their deep feeling about what is right or wrong. But we are not conservatives looking at a woman in a short skirt and judging her. I will not defend anyone thinking that way. What we see is the damage of sexism. And our position on the reform vows puts us on the extreme end of equality, not in the centre. Mothers hold their daughter down while they perform genital mutilation. Because women struggle with equality. Women in the movement defend Ebola and their own slave trade. Because they fail to see the sin. It's been 6,000 years. But I would ask anyone whether or not we have the freedom to compromise. Or God is requiring us to learn through the message. Organisation is a specifically severe test in this dispensation. For 30 years, there were women leaders in this movement. There was a female leader in Australia and in other parts of the world. For one of 31 years, they have had support from the leadership. One of 31 years. So is it any wonder now that people start to attack organisation? Is it any wonder that us extremists are wishing to uphold it strictly? When you have a woman leader in North America, a woman leader in Oceania, it's as much a test here as it is there. No change was made to the organisation of Oceania or Australia last year. There was only a verbal repetition of what had already been put in place. But it's not just on the continental level. We have a woman leader in South Sudan facing persecution and abuse. We have a woman leader in Argentina, a woman leader in the German world. Beneath them, we have female Bible workers through Africa now. Sitting on boards. The attacks occurring in this dispensation in Africa, in the West, in the name of absolute freedom, against the vows, against practiced organisation and practiced equality, and nothing more than the internal application of the external compromise. It's false freedom versus the midnight cry. And we have the history of the Millerites to teach us that. So whoever wins, it does not change the course of the United States. If they were so supportive of Kamala Harris, why isn't she their presidential candidate? They've balanced that presidential ticket. Just as the Whig Party did, just as the Republican Party did. To win people. Should go back and look at his record. We should see the inequality of today for what it is. The extent of it and the historical causes of it. To give legitimacy to so-called extremist positions like defund the police. If you want to vote, at least see that you would be voting for a compromise. I'm sorry I've gone so far over time. We weren't wishing to make application about who wins. What I want people to see is why Ellen White's, maybe not her harshest words, but her most extensive condemnation is preserved for the North. If we can see the external danger and sin of compromise, we'll understand the internal shaking. And as much as it is against what we might feel is the natural order of things, to bring those feelings in line with the midnight cry and not the other way around. To recognize organization and not just encourage, not just uplift, but respect the leadership of the women in charge. And I do not refer to myself. I refer to your local leaders. Be they continental, be they on your boards, be they your Bible workers, because we've only begun this work. And it'll only have its greatest success if we do it together. If you kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Sometimes in your actions, we find it so hard to see love. The prayer of our heart is that we will see it. Interpreting inspiration correctly. And the current steps you are requiring us to take as a people. That every requirement you make of us is only for our own healing. You love to see us strong. You wanted us to just rise higher and higher. May we see your motives and your great love. Even in what feels like a restriction of freedom. I pray for the women that are in leadership positions of this movement. Those who have been placed in those positions in the last year. Those newly finding their voices and their independence. Those who have led for years before now. Facing sexism, rebellion and disrespect. And yet for the love of the truth stayed the course. I pray, Lord, that you will bring us into concord as a movement. We know that we go forth with power at Panium. We put our trust in you to bring that about. May every struggling member of the movement now be part of it. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Hello, my sister.
To our guest speaker of the hour, Elder Tess, on behalf of the Islands of the Sea Ministry, we'd like to take this time to thank you for the in-depth discussion, presentation about the glorious land, and also like to thank our brothers and sisters tuning in and listening from different parts of the world. We'd like to thank the Lord for the insights on equality, especially on women across the globe. And we thank the Lord for the strength and also for the courage in bringing this in times that we are facing. We'd like to thank the Lord for you giving us the words of encouragement, and also it to help us to expand our understanding and increase our knowledge, especially on issues on equality and slavery. Since we have come to the last day of our camp meeting here in Fiji, we do hope and pray that the Almighty God will continue to lead, direct, and guide, and bestow His abundant blessing upon you. With those few words, I would like to say thank you so much, Elder Tess, and we hope to hear and meet you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Marini. I love you all. My brother George. Hello all. Bless your day.
Thank you. Thank you.